get started, just want to thank you all for coming out. My name is Michael McNamee. I'm with the Office of Alumni and Family Relations, and this is our Stratton Series lecture for this block. The Stratton Series is brought by a generous gift from the Stratton family, and it enables us to bring professionals from our alumni community back to campus to share a little bit about their journey and also about career development and career advice. So I'd like to just say a little bit about our featured speaker today. Caroline Beaton graduated magna cum laude from Colorado College in 2013. She's now a full-time workplace psychology journalist for Forbes, the Huffington Post, and Psychology Today, among others. A writer, speaker, and trusted millennial voice, Caroline helps her generation live and work with purpose. Let's welcome her.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me back there so I don't have to use the podium mic? Yeah? Raise your hand if you can. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. If you can't hear me throughout the speech, just raise your hand and back and I'll pop over here. So it's great to be back. I love this school. I love CC. It's just surreal walking around here again. So thank you for having me. So 3.5 years ago, I was at a podium in McHugh Commons reading a segment of my creative writing senior thesis. And I was feeling pretty good about myself. Like, you know how high school seniors think that they are just top dog? Like, they go off campus for lunch to like Taco Bell? Well, that's how I felt as a senior at CC. I was starting around campus and being like, I'm gonna be a writer. And I just had my first piece of fiction published in an online magazine, and I was like 85% sure that that was the beginning of my fame. But I wasn't so unrealistic that I thought that I could be a best-selling author right when I graduated college. So in the interim, I decided that I would apply to be Lululemon's senior director of marketing. I was like, I love yoga. I teach yoga. I'm moving to Canada. That's where they're headquartered. I'd be amazing at this. Okay, well, I'll get back to my story in a second. We don't need research to tell us, though it does, that Generation Y, our generation, millennials, are idealistic. And in fact, our expectations are higher than any other generations ever have been. And part of our expectations include trying to find meaningful work. And while other generations found purpose through religion, civic engagement, politics, community, early marriage, for whatever reason, for reasons you might have read in Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, I know a lot of CC classes read that, millennials are not participating as much in these activities. And so in lieu of this sort of participation, we're looking to work for a sense of purpose. And that's a laudable goal because meaningful work is associated with positive emotions, better mental health, and meaningful work is, well, meaningful. But the problem is, a lot of millennials aren't finding meaningful work. In fact, 70% of millennials are disengaged at work, and this is actually high compared to the average. Just 13% of adults are engaged in work worldwide. And a study found that among 21 to 29-year-olds, just 35% of them look forward to work in the morning. And millennials are also bored. One study found that recent grads who were in administrative, sales, and marketing positions rated their boredom as a 7.7 out of 10 on a scale. And by the way, boredom doesn't just have to mean twiddling your thumbs at your desk. It can mean what a lot of millennials report, being under intense pressure and stress from your supervisors, but because the work isn't intellectually engaging, you're both bored and busy. And millennials are also frustrated. So one study found that recent grads who had a sense of a calling, what they wanted to do with their lives, but their vocational identity or their vocational achievement didn't match their calling, were more frustrated than people who didn't have a calling at all. And I think this is particularly apt for CC grads because we're so passionate about so many things and we want to leave our mark on the world, but then we get into the real world and it can be a little bit disappointing when we don't find that reality right away. Oops. And we're also not advancing. 60% of millennials say that they haven't made as much progress in their careers as they'd hoped. And just one specific example of this is in 1976, less than half of high schoolers thought that they would be managers by the time they were 30. And then today, 2/3 of high schoolers think they'll be managers by the time they're 30. But that actual statistic, in fact, like how many people are managers by the time they're 30 is still just 18%. And then finally, millennials are not doing as well as they thought they would financially. Just a quarter think that they'll be poorer than their parents, but the reality is chalking up to be essentially that the average millennial will be financially worse off than his or her parents. Okay, so if you're in the audience, or if I were in the audience 3 years ago, you're saying, yeah, but I'm not average. This isn't gonna happen to me. And that's exactly what I thought. But in fact, that's exactly what happened to me and to many, if not all of my friends from CC. So I didn't hear back from Lululemon, and I was sort of appalled because I wore their yoga pants religiously. I was like, come on, give me something here, but didn't hear back. Instead, I ended up as a receptionist in a downtown Vancouver law firm, and I was bored, miserable, barely affording rent. And I wanted to be frolicking in British Columbia's coastal forest, but instead I was stuck on the 27th floor with a windowless view of the elevators. So my faith was starting to wane, and I was starting to harden a little bit. And I think this happens to a lot of CC grads and a lot of college graduates in general. We leave college with fierce optimism about what we can do in the world, and then we start to become a little bit disheartened and a little more pessimistic. And oh, I'm missing a slide. Well, anyway, so just a third of 20-somethings say that they are depressed. And half of 20-somethings report being in crisis at some time or another. And then finally, half of working millennials believe that the American dream is dead. Okay, so a UCLA study found that when students enter college, they tend to become more liberal, more spiritual, and more optimistic. CC student, possibly me. But then that trend reverses 5 to 8 years after graduating. And for me, that trend reversed in about 9 months. I was stuck in that dead-end job. I was rejected from every English PhD program I applied to. Thanks anyway for the recommendation, Steve. And my whiny fiction was getting rejected from everywhere. Okay, so in short, here are my slides. I told you these stats already. Why are so many millennials in the red? Well, a couple reasons. First, the real world is tough. It's tougher than we think it's going to be. And the second reason is we make it tougher. And that's what this talk is about how millennials are accidentally sabotaging their chances at fulfilling work and what to do about it. And I believe that the reason that we're finding it so hard in the real world is because we're prioritizing the wrong 3 things. And the first is we're over-prioritizing choice. So let me back up for a second. So millennials have most of their basic needs met, at least first world millennials. So they have food, shelter, water, Wi-Fi, vaccinations. And there's a ton of atrocious things going on in the world, but we can celebrate the fact that first world millennials have the highest standard of living of any generation or demographic in probably the history of the world. And so in Maslow's hierarchy's terms, we have the bottom 4 rungs of the hierarchy fulfilled, and so we're ready to self-actualize. And in college, self-actualization means attending thought-provoking lectures like this, and becoming a yoga instructor, or immersing yourself in other world-changing extracurriculars, meditating in the wilderness. But in the real world, self-actualization goes by a different name: opportunity. And today's millennials face an unprecedented selection of options. consumer goods, romantic partners, career possibilities, educational pursuits, living spaces, the list goes on. And if you ask, and so we love this. This is amazing. It is truly incredible that we have this many options. But it's also a lot of pressure. So if you ask an average millennial, or really an average American, if they want 2 options or 10 options in something, they'll almost always tell you they want 10 options. And in fact, they might even say something like, well, don't I have more than 10 options? Like, can you give me more than 10? And so we love choice. We love believing that we can do or get or buy anything we set our minds to. But there's an unintended consequence of too many options, and that's overwhelm. And that takes several forms. The first is we're scared of missing out, fear of better options. So say your career is a Utah canyon, and this canyon is worthwhile to go down, it's gorgeous, you're really interested in exploring this canyon, but there's one problem. There's a million other canyons you could go down. And so rather than going down our one canyon, we wonder if other people are in other canyons having more fun and making more money. And once you go down your canyon, the thing about canyons and careers is it's actually pretty hard to backtrack. And you can't just leap over the wall of the canyon. And so a lot of millennials feel like they don't want to choose at all. They're scared and paralyzed and scared of missing out. And that leads to feeling stuck. Okay, so employees who are presented 401k options, the more 401k options they're presented, the less likely they are to sign up for any, which is absurd. You should always sign up for a 401k plan. And the same thing happens with stock options. And there's the infamous JAM study, which many of you have probably studied, especially in like intro to psych, where the more jams at a grocery demo table that researchers offer, the less likely people are to buy any of the jams. So even though people show up to the table more, they're more attracted to tables with lots of jams, they're less likely to buy any jams. Whereas if you present just a few jam options, people are more likely to buy them. Okay, and then the third consequence of too much choice is that we're less committed to any one of our options. So people who are men who are in committed relationships, when they're shown images of attractive women, they later rate their commitment to their existing partners as lower. And the same thing happens when women are shown images of dominant, high-status men. And so we have this feeling of the grass is always greener, and the more options we have, the less likely we want to commit to any one pasture. And so for millennials, we change majors in college an average of 3 times. And the average American 29-year-old has held 7 jobs before turning 29. And if you think that this is just skewed because of like lower income or disadvantaged populations, consider that the most likely demographic of that age group to job hop is those who are educated and have a financial safety net. And then we're also less satisfied with what we do pick. So people who are given a piece of artwork to take home are divided into 2 groups. And one group of the participants is told that they can exchange their artwork as much as they'd like to. They can just call the researchers up and they'll exchange it and find a better piece that they like. And then the second group of participants is told that they are not allowed to exchange their artwork. They're stuck with it. Well, interestingly, the group who's stuck with the artwork enjoys their artwork more, appreciates it more, and has less and fewer regrets than the people who are told that they can exchange their artwork. And we see the same thing with regrets. So you'd think that older people would have more regrets because they've lived longer. But actually, researchers find that older people have fewer regrets than younger people because young people are faced with infinite opportunities. And this also explains why regrets of inaction are more prevalent and more painful than regrets of action. So a regret of an inaction is like, well, I could have done this or this or this or this or this, but instead I didn't do anything. And so it's just this infinite field of opportunity, and our imagination just goes wild with what could have happened. Whereas a regret of action is just, I could have done this, or the alternative is, I could have not done this, and so we regret it less. Okay, and then finally, in the face of many options, we make worse decisions. So speed daters who are shown more and more people at an evening of potential mates start to judge those potential mates more superficially the more they see them. And we think of traditional procrastination as, I need to be working on this speech for CC so badly right now, but instead I'm going to watch TV. But there's another kind of procrastination which is increasingly common, and that's called decisional procrastination. And basically, that's where you have a ton of options, you start to feel overwhelmed by all of your options, and you think that you're being conscientious and you're evaluating all of your choices and all of the information that those choices entail. But instead, decisional procrastinators become neurotic, less conscientious, they become more perfectionistic in a bad sort of way, and they make worse decisions. Okay, so some degree of choice is important. It's good. But prioritizing choice above all else isn't fulfilling. And what we need instead is commitment. And commitment is extrinsically rewarding. So employees who stay with one employer start to gain higher income, better retirement benefits as the time goes on, which is sort of just common sense, right? And then people who stay with one line of work longer develop more specialized skills and a better reputation. And commitment is also intrinsically rewarding. Commitment is meaningful, and it's associated with less procrastination. And people who commit, actually, their professional commitment has a buffering effect on their development of illness. And then, aside from commitment's correlations, fundamentally and philosophically, we all want to be pilgrims or journeyers, backpackers in life, rather than tourists. No tourists. Okay, but how do we commit to a line of work if we graduate and still have no idea what we want to do with our lives? Well, we start by developing identity capital. And identity capital is our collection of personal and professional resources and attributes that include everything from what's on your resume to how you present yourself, how you communicate, even where you live and what you wear, what you do. In short, it's the things that we do well enough or long enough that they become part of who we are. And we developed identity capital by following our interests. And we follow our interests sort of like we route find in the wilderness. If you've ever just gone into a little piece of wilderness, like maybe Palmer Park or like, what's the Red Canyon? Red Rocks Canyon? Yeah. So if we go there and instead of picking a path, we just sort of wander from interest to interest, what we're drawn to and what's available. And then slowly we start to come to a location that is uniquely ours. But then the flip side of developing our interests is eliminating our non-interests. And in that sense, developing identity capital is kind of like playing a game of Clue. And over time in the game Clue, you start to eliminate the suspects' weapons rooms that aren't the murder suspects by asking people what their cards are, seeing what other people are doing, and actually going into those individual rooms. If you remember that board game, you would like go into the billiard room and see if, like, ask other people if the room was like the murder suspect. If that makes any sense. So when I was in Vancouver, I started to do that same thing. Sorry about eliminating Canada here.
I was so happy when you moved there.
I was too in the beginning. Okay, so when I was in Vancouver, I stayed at my full-time job, but I started to explore other interests and options by talking to people, by taking classes and stuff, and I began to eliminate different options. And as I eliminated my options, I started to see a trend in what I really wanted to do. And for me, that was pursuing a combination of writing and psychology. And so I became a research assistant at the University of British Columbia's Social Cognition and Emotion fiction lab. And then I started submitting nonfiction work to publications, and apparently they liked it way better than my fiction. And so I started to take off and really started to develop that certain line of work. Okay, and then the second thing that we over-prioritize, I believe, is passion. But let me start by saying that people who are professionally interested in their jobs or feel that their work is a form of self-expression for them are infinitely more happy, more engaged, more fulfilled at work. But I don't think that passion is enough, because passion, as Terry Trespicio says in her TED Talk, is a feeling, and feelings change. So this is me when I became a self-employed writer after about 2 years of that dreaded time in Vancouver. And I was pretty ecstatic. I'd worked really hard for this time, and I felt like I was finally my own boss. But then, 4 to 6 months later, I realized that I wasn't really my own boss, because I still answered to clients, I still answered to deadlines. And I started to become a little bit disillusioned with my work, and I resented getting up in the morning and writing, which was sad because it had just been a lifelong passion of mine. And so I started to consider commercial real estate. But I'm really glad that I didn't go into commercial real estate, because my passion came back for my writing. But if I had abandoned it, the moment my passion had waned, the moment my passion had dropped, this would have been me 6 months later. Oops, not there. And if I'd done commercial real estate, my passion for that would have subsided too, and 6 months later I'd be absent from that. And the same thing with my romantic relationships. If I expected passion for every single day of my romantic relationships, I would be absent from really loving, caring relationships. So as Angela Duckworth, who's a psychology researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, who just wrote a book called Grit, which I highly recommend, she says that passion is the opening scene in a much longer and larger narrative. And she also says that meaningful work is a little bit of discovery, a little bit of that spark and passion, followed by a lifetime of development and deepening. And this is why follow your passion is fine advice, but it's insufficient, because passion alone does not equal purpose. And equally insufficient advice is do what makes you happy, because here's what makes us happy. The average American will spend more hours watching TV than working over the course of a lifetime. Here's work. So, if we really all just did what makes us happy, we would all be a bunch of fornicating chimps. But instead, I want to be this. And so let me return actually to talk about pleasure versus meaning, short-term and long-term. Okay, so researchers ask people what they want to do a year from now. And people say that they want to attend a career development lecture like this. Or they say that they want to watch a life-altering, based on true story, deep movie. But when researchers ask people what they want to do a day or a day from now or today, people say that they want to have sex, they want to eat food, they want to watch a chick flick or a romantic comedy. And so this is, and really so at the heart of passion is this short-term mindset. And if we are constantly dragged along by this short-term seeking pleasure and passion in all of our activities, then we'll really never get to that deeper, sustained fulfillment. And to get there, what we need is a vision, because a vision helps us prioritize long-term meaning and challenge over short-term pleasure and ease. So a career vision is a picture of what you aspire to and what inspires you professionally. Okay, so my boyfriend Danny is in his first semester of law school. He actually just took his first final exam this morning. And law school is so hard. And a lot of times he wakes up in the morning, doesn't want to go to class. He comes back from class, doesn't want to work. It's just hard stuff. It's a rigorous curriculum, and so is most working situations. But Danny has a vision. He wants to be a water lawyer in Durango, Colorado. He loves Utah, Powell, loves mountain biking, and more than any of that, he is really passionate about water law rights and issues in the American West. And so whenever he faces madness or frustration or depression around his coursework, then he just thinks of his Durango vision. And visions help us simplify our decisions, because a vision is essentially a long-term, high-priority goal. So every opportunity that comes our way, we can filter through our long-term vision. And if that opportunity, if that option isn't in line with the long-term vision, then we can say no with peace. A vision also improves our physical and psychological health. So one crazy study broke participants up into 3 groups. And the first group was told to write about past trauma. And the second group was told to write about a vision of their best possible future self. And then the third group was a control, and they were told to write about something random that had happened that day. And what's nuts is 5 months later, researchers followed up, and the people who had written either about trauma or their best possible future selves reported that they had an increased well-being, and they reported decreased instances of physical illness. Okay, now if you think that sounds unbelievable, consider the fact that people in retirement communities who have a sense of purpose or a vision for what they want to do in the remaining time of their lives actually live longer. And then finally, vision boosts achievement, motivation, and grit. So one study followed elementary school kids for 50 years. It's actually still following them. And it found that the single greatest predictor of creative achievement in adulthood is falling in love with a future image of yourself. And then secondly, vision increases our motivation. So women who are in STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, and math fields, are more likely to stay in the field if their professional vision includes them working in that field. And so just having a vision of them in those fields allows them to overcome the barriers and obstacles associated with women in those fields and makes them more engaged and committed in their work. Okay, so finally, a vision allows us to be gritty. And grit, according to Angela Duckworth again, is not just falling in love, but it's staying in love. And gritty people may not execute at one task better than anyone else, but they keep executing better than anyone else. And this is why grit predicts academic success even better than IQ does. Okay, and then finally, we mistakenly over-prioritize ourselves. And selfishness, well, first let me say that when we graduate college, a lot of times it feels like it's us against the world. Because it's lonely when you graduate college. Like CC is just such a wonderful community, and it's sometimes hard to be off on your own, lone wolfing it. But sometimes the selfishness that can results in loneliness and social isolation. It can also lead to narcissism, which is correlated with anxiety, neuroticism, and poor performance. Despite our image of the narcissistic leader, they're really the exception and not the rule. And selfishness is also unfulfilling. So researchers asked people if they identified more with being a taker or a giver. And people who identified as being a taker were happier than people who identified as being a giver. But people who identified as being givers found more meaning in their lives, and they reported higher instances of meaning. Okay, and so instead of prioritizing ourselves, or at least in addition to prioritizing ourselves, we need to connect. And connection is meaningful. In fact, connection and meaning are so tightly correlated that some researchers even define purpose as connection. So these are from various researchers. A sense of purpose means what we do matters to people besides ourselves, or a feeling that in this one small way, I think I'm going to make the world a better place. or the intention to contribute to the well-being of others. And people with meaning mindsets as opposed to happiness mindsets, they seek connections, they give to others, and they orient themselves to a larger purpose, whereas people with happiness mindsets prioritize themselves. And then connection is also joyful. One 75-year-long Harvard study found that the single best predictor of life satisfaction and well-being, the most important component to a well-lived life, was a feeling of love and belonging. So connection is associated with life satisfaction and decreased stress. And connection is also self-defining because we understand ourselves in social context. So here is a thing having an existential crisis. And it doesn't understand what it is because it hasn't looked around and hasn't seen itself in the context of this larger trend, this larger surroundings. And when it looks up, looks out, finally it sees this. It's a flower. I know, it's so dumb. Okay, so finally, connection improves organizational commitment and performance. Basically, when we feel connected to other people at work, then we're more likely to stay around, we're more likely to be engaged in our work, and we do better work. Okay, but how do we connect? We develop social capital, and social capital is what makes us feel valuable and be valued in today's marketplace. And it's a combination of social networks, trust and reciprocity, and a sense of belonging and place attachment. And we start to develop social capital by learning what other people value. So asking, what does the world need? And though maybe to our moms and families we are innately, inherently valuable, but to the job market we are not valuable inherently. And that's why we need to develop specialized skills. And that means asking, what taps my talent? What am I good at? Or what do I want to be good at? What do I want to develop my skills so that I'm so good that I can't be ignored? And then part of developing specialized skills is comparing yourself to other people. We hear in elementary school that we shouldn't compare ourselves. But we absolutely should compare ourselves because society thrives based off of individual differences and strengths. And so if I wanted to be a math professor, I shouldn't be because I'm terrible at math and all things numbers. And same goes for whatever maybe you're passionate about but not good at. Find that intersection. And find groups that value you. Become indispensable. So Euripides said that each has his special excellence, and one ought to place a man where he can do the most good. So if you have specialized skills, but you're next to a bunch of other people who also have specialized skills, then you're not really indispensable. In fact, you're pretty replaceable because other people do the same thing you do. And so the key is to find a special spot where you have specialized skills that not a lot of other people in your organization have. And then finally, social capital requires sacrifice. So research finds that people say that they find more meaning from their families and lovers than they do from their friends. And why is this? Well, I believe that it's because we have a sense of duty and obligation to our families. And we don't really have that with our friends, especially modern friendships. If we don't know that other people have our backs, then we probably won't have their backs in turn. And in order to have someone's back, sometimes you need to sacrifice and compromise your own priorities and well-being for them. And so one way to ask if you're making sacrifice to your connections is, am I just checking in when it's convenient for me? And Angela Duckworth says that a calling is the sense that the sacrifice is worth it because our efforts pay dividends to other people. Okay, so in short, there's 4 commandments of social capital. And the first is there must be a need for it. 2, you must be good at it. And 3, you should be recognized and appreciated, valued for it. And finally, you must sacrifice for it. Okay, so prioritizing choice, passion, and self alone is not enough to produce fulfilling work. Instead, it can be temporarily pleasing, but it's ultimately unfulfilling. So instead, we need commitment, vision, and connection. And I just want to return to my own story for a second here. So I finally I've decided against a lot of other options. and committed to a few that I was really passionate about and relatively good at. And then I had a vision, and I still have that vision, and it's to be an author and a speaker. And so when I'm having a bad day or when my passion is starting to slow down a little bit, I just remember that vision, and it helps me filter through all of the options that come my way and helps me survive the daily ups and downs of life. And then finally, I connected. I decided what the world needed. And the need that I sought to fulfill was helping millennials transition into the real world and find meaningful work. I don't think that that's happening enough. And I sacrifice for that end every day. And every day. So these priorities aren't really just like a 1, 2, 3 done sort of deal. It's one of those things where you just keep doing it and doing it. And for me, it's always a work in progress and always forgetting these things and then remembering them and forgetting and remembering. And really the difference between these two sorts of lifestyles that I've laid out for you is the Greek words hedonic versus eudaimonic happiness. And hedonic means it's pleasure, enjoyment, comfort, absence of distress. So that's sort of a pleasing sort of happiness, like present in the moment, like life's good. And then the second kind, the deeper kind, I think, is one that prioritizes growth, meaning, authenticity, excellence, investment, and satisfaction. Okay, so if by chance you find yourself graduated from this wonderful school and perhaps in a rainy climate and lost, alone, overwhelmed with options, I hope that you will ask yourself these 3 questions. Am I committed? Am I in love with a vision? And am I connected? And if you answer no to any one of those questions, you'll now know your new most vital purpose, finding ways to say yes. Thank you.